Good morning, Title I coordinators. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule today to join us for our November webinar. My name is Erin Sudduth, and I'm the branch manager for the Title I Part A Support and Improvement branch, and I will let my colleague introduce himself.
I'm David Malonti. I'm one of the assistant directors in the division.
And as always, if you have any questions or comments during this webinar, those of you joining us in Teams, if you want to put those in the chat, you can do that. Or if you'd like to use the raise hand feature, and then we can have you unmute and ask your question. You can also send questions to me via email, and that's erin.sudduth@education.ky.gov. And as always, we do record all of our webinars and we post them on our Title I Documents and Resources webpage, so that will probably be up later today or maybe sometime tomorrow. All right. And I know I already said this, but we've had some people join since then. Just go ahead and check and make sure that your microphone and your cameras are turned off so that we can all focus on the presentation today. Thank you. I do want to do a quick recap from our October webinar. If you weren't able to join us, make sure you go back and watch that recording. We, as always, had some various timely reminders, and we discussed the new program documentation webinar and PowerPoint that are now available on our Documents and Resources webpage. That's a new resource kind of walking you through our monitoring checklist and some suggested documentation tips and examples of documentation that you could be saving to demonstrate program compliance. We also talked about the timely spending of funds, and that included some I think someone has joined and needs to make sure that they mute themselves. Let me see if I can find you in the thing. Okay, I think we got it. That topic also included some general guidelines on how to monitor the obligation of funds each month to help ensure that you are going to meet that 15% carryover limitation and you don't need to request a waiver. And I'll have a little more about that in just a minute. So taking a look at today's agenda, we've got more announcements and reminders. We'll touch on the November newsletter just to make sure you didn't miss anything in that. And our main focus is going to be on obtaining and utilizing parent feedback for the Title I program. We're going to look at feedback for both Title I Part A events and just the Title I Part A program in general. First announcement is about our comparability report. Of course, that was due on November 1st, and thank you to everyone who submitted their reports early or on time. We have all of them in now, and our consultants are working to review and approve just the last handful of reports. For those of you who were actually required to calculate comparability, and I know that your consultant emailed you this when they told you that your report had been approved, make sure that you retain those Infinite Campus enrollment summary reports and whatever staffing documentation you use to complete that report as part of your record retention process. That would be something that KDE would request to see in the event that your district is selected for monitoring. Our next reminder is about obligating funds, and I did just mention that in last month's webinar, we looked at a breakdown of the percentage of the allocation that should be obligated each month in order to have 85% obligated by that September 30th, 2024 deadline. And what I shared was that obligating approximately 5.6% per month will just kind of help make sure that you are in line to meet that requirement. So if we're using that 5.66%, that means that by November, we should have about 28% of the allocation obligated. Now, remember, that is just a general guideline. That is not a requirement. It's not tied to anything. It's just to kind of keep you on track. So if you are slightly over or under that amount, that's okay. Now, if you're significantly under that amount at this point, you may want to take a closer look at Munis with your finance officer to make sure that maybe something hasn't been overlooked or coded to a different spending category. And you're also going to want to make sure that you are monitoring the obligation of your funds that have been reserved for students experiencing homelessness, parent and family engagement, and for those of you who are providing equitable services to private schools. We want to make sure that those funds are being spent during the current school year. Remember, we don't really want very much carryover with those. And if anything is carried over, it has to be used for that same purpose next year. So keep that in mind. Our final announcement is about monitoring. All of our districts at this point who are going to be monitored this year, both consolidated and Title I desk monitoring, have been notified. Our consolidated monitoring notifications were sent to superintendents on October 20th, and our desk monitoring notifications were sent to superintendents on October 30th. So if you have not heard from your superintendent that you were selected, then that means that you are not going to be monitored this year. But I do want to remind you that all districts are required to save program documentation and records for 3 years, even if the district was not selected for monitoring. And on top of that, KDE does strongly recommend going beyond that 3 years. Go ahead and save things for 5 years. That is definitely a best practice. And again, you can go and look at that new program documentation webinar on our webpage to get some tips about the types of things you'll want to be saving. I also included a couple of timely school reminders this month. So the first one is about the compact. Make sure that that compact is being discussed in relation to the individual child's academic achievement during at least one parent conference, that's at the elementary level, and that that discussion is being properly documented. We did include a reminder about this in our November newsletter, but this is one of our more common monitoring findings each year, so it is definitely worth mentioning again. Don't forget that in our July webinar, we had a couple examples of how you could document this discussion, and you can find that webinar and the PowerPoint on our Documents and Resources webpage if you'd like to rewatch that, or definitely share it out with your Title I building principals. And then our other reminder is just making sure that all the schools are aware of the requirement to notify parents if a child is taught for 4 or more consecutive weeks by a teacher that does not meet state certification standards. That includes long-term substitutes and those on emergency certification. Teachers holding a temporary provisional certificate meet the applicable certification requirements, and a letter is not required. That does include that's pursuant to that option 6 temporary provisional certification. If you haven't had a chance to read this month's newsletter, that's also posted on our webpage. Here's what was included. We had some next steps about the comparability report, which I shared again here. An announcement about the 2024 National ESEA conference in Portland, Oregon. You can still register for that. Again, we talked about discussing the compact at conferences. We also had an In Case You Missed It article where we kind of touched on one of the articles that was shared in the ESEA Now resource, formerly Title I Admin. And that was about communication and growing relationships with families. And then just a friendly reminder that we do have that ESEA Now subscription opportunity available for all districts for the 23-24 school year, and some steps for you to take if you haven't yet taken advantage of that. If you're not currently subscribed to the newsletter, you can do that through the newsletter itself, or you can just reach out to me and I'll add you to the list. Be sure that you're sharing the newsletter with principals and other staff who might be collaborating with the program. And we can also add them to the subscription list too if they would like. All right. So our main focus is going to be, like I said, on obtaining and utilizing parent input and feedback. The concepts of things like parent input, the phrase meaningful consultation with parents, those are referenced multiple times throughout section 1116 of ESSA. That's the parent and family engagement section. So we've got ESSA 1116A1. Programs, activities, and procedures for the involvement of parents and families shall be planned and implemented with meaningful consultation with parents of participating children. 1116A2D, conduct with the meaningful involvement of parents and family members an annual evaluation of the content and effectiveness of the parent and family engagement policy in improving the academic quality of all schools served with Title I Part A. And then 1116A3B, parents and family members shall be involved in the decisions regarding how funds are allotted for parental involvement activities. So these are just a handful of the references to some sort of collaboration, consultation, joint development that's referenced in section 1116. So what we're focusing on today is getting that feedback on events as well as the entire Title I program. For many districts, the majority of parent and family engagement events and activities occur at the school level. So be sure to share the information from this webinar and even a link to the recording once it's available with your Title I building principals and other people who may need to see it. So obtaining parent feedback has a lot of benefits. It can help districts and schools kind of think about and plan future events and activities that really meet parent needs, as well as increase participation. If the things that you're offering aren't really meeting their needs, then people are less likely to come. One thing you could consider doing is developing a brief survey for parents to complete after the event. That can just give you some very immediate feedback, which can be reviewed and analyzed and then inform future events, either for the next school year or even within the same school year. You may want to provide the survey before parents leave the event while things are still fresh on their mind. And you want to be sure that you are being intentional when you're developing some sort of survey or questionnaire to ensure that you receive feedback that you can actually use. And our August webinar contains some great information and tips about developing meaningful parent and family engagement events. So again, if you missed that one, be sure to go back and watch the recording on the webpage. So I've got some very general event survey tips of how you can make these surveys work for you and get the kind of responses that you can use. So the first one is make sure that it's easily accessible. So if you're using an online survey, which I know a lot of our districts and schools do, you might consider creating a QR code or one of those shortened links that can maybe be projected on a screen at the event or printed out and placed on the table so it can be quickly accessed, and then parents can take that survey before they leave. You could also maybe have a table set up with some Chromebooks where parents could just step up and complete that survey right there. And although many people do focus on online surveys, there's nothing wrong with a paper and pencil survey. Some sort of exit slip style survey just placed on the tables, that can work just as well as a digital option. And providing parents and guardians with multiple options for completions may have the greatest impact. Some people may be more comfortable with paper and pencil compared to the digital, or vice versa. We do recommend that if you're going to use the paper and pencil survey, that you then take those results and maybe compile them digitally on a Word document or a spreadsheet or something. And that's just going to allow you to then have an easier time reviewing and analyzing those responses down the road instead of flipping through a bunch of handwritten sheets. And typing information as opposed to scanning in a bunch of handwritten pages when we're talking about documentation. It's very beneficial. That's one of the tips that's in our documentation webinar. It ensures that all of the information can be easily read and understood, and you can even do like keyword searches to quickly locate things. The next tip is to keep it brief. Not asking too many questions could increase the number of respondents. So people are often more likely to complete something like a survey if they know it's only going to take them a few minutes. I know that I am. For example, 5 questions can be completed quickly while still providing the school with meaningful feedback. Now, there's nothing special about the number 5. If you only need 3 questions, then use 3. If you need more like 10, use 10. That's fine. I would recommend trying to keep it to 10 or less, just so that when somebody opens it, it doesn't seem like an overwhelmingly long survey. Again, make sure that you ask meaningful questions. You want to make these questions count, especially if you're just going to ask a limited number of them. Ask the questions that are going to provide you with quality feedback you can use to inform the program. For example, focusing on open-ended questions will provide you with more information than simple yes/no questions. And we're going to look at a couple sample suggested questions you could use or customize in a minute. Of course, you need to review and analyze the results. This is a key step that sometimes gets overlooked when utilizing surveys. So if you're not going back and reviewing and analyzing the results of your survey, then taking that analysis and using it to foster change and continuous improvement, you might as well not be doing your survey at all. And of course, be sure that you are saving that documentation, anything pertinent related to the surveys that you conduct. So this might include, of course, the survey questions themselves, the responses, and then evidence of that review or analysis. For example, maybe some meeting minutes where you got together to look at the results and plan for future events. So these are just some sample example type of questions that you may want to use on a survey, or like I said, kind of give you a jumping off point to create your own questions. So the first one, something like, how did you hear about this event? This may give you an idea of where you need to focus your event. I'll call it advertising, for lack of a better word. You might consider providing checkboxes for all of the ways in which the event was publicized to parents and guardians. Did you send a flyer? Was there an email, social media posts, etc.? And then have the parents check all of the options that apply. And if there's one that nobody's checking, maybe that's an avenue that we don't really need to utilize as much. The next question, what did you enjoy about this event? Or maybe what could make it better? These are just a simple, we call it a plus delta format. Pluses are the things that people like, and the deltas are the things that people would like to see changed. And that gives us information on just what worked well and maybe what didn't work well, some suggestions for improvement. The next question is, how will you use the information shared at this event at home? So remember that the main intent of Title I Part A Parent and Family Engagement is to help parents engage in their child's education, help them achieve academic success. It could be beneficial to know how parents intend to implement the skills that they learned at the event. Now, the last three questions I have on this slide kind of help you in planning future events. So would you attend a similar event in the future? It's very easy for us to get in the habit of kind of doing the same thing year after year, but that may not fit in with the needs of the current school population. If this is maybe something that's been going on for 10 years, maybe it doesn't ring as true as it once did. What other topics would you like to see shared at future events? That really gets at what parents need. And are there any subjects or concepts, I think I have a typo there, in which you need guidance to better support your child? Again, getting to the heart of what parents need to help their children succeed. Next is annual evaluation feedback. The information on this slide comes from ESSA 1116A2D, and I did briefly touch on that at the start of this section of the webinar. So now we're going to go in and take a closer look. I've also emphasized a couple of key phrases in bold to just draw your attention to the types of things that you should be evaluating during this process. So what ESSA says is annual evaluation of content and effectiveness of the parent and family engagement policy in improving academic quality of all Title I served schools, including identifying the following. So we're looking at both content and effectiveness of the policy. Remember that within your policy, that's where you're kind of outlining your parent and family engagement program. So you are essentially evaluating the effectiveness of the program when you're evaluating the policy. So the things that we want to be identifying through this process, the first is greater barriers to participation. So is there anything that prohibited parents from participating in your parent and family engagement program? And if so, is there anything that the school or the district could do to help mitigate or even fully remove that barrier? Now, the next item may seem a bit obvious, identifying the needs of parents to assist with their children's learning. Is there a particular area where parents need more assistance to help their children at home? Are the events that the school or the district has designed aligned with those needs? And then finally, identify strategies to support successful interaction. So what's the dynamic between schools and families? Are the majority of interactions productive and positive, or is there some room for improvement? Some sample questions that you might want to use on an annual program and policy evaluation. You might want a couple basic questions about the policy and the compact. I know I mentioned focusing more on open-ended questions, but you might just have a basic yes or no question confirming that parents received a copy of the policy and the compact, that they were provided an opportunity to give feedback on the contents of those documents. For elementary schools, you might want a question on there about, did you discuss the compact during at least one conference, that type of thing. The next sample question, what's the best way to notify you about events? So remember, using multiple methods of communication is going to maximize the number of parents who receive your message, whether that's about an event or the policy, anything. A question like this is going to tell you which methods to focus on. And I know we've talked in several other webinars, for example, about not relying solely on social media, for example. You could ask them, which Title I parent events did you attend this year? You could even list the Title I events that were available, and then they can check off which ones they attended. It might be helpful to list corresponding dates with that, or even maybe a quick sentence summary about what happened at the event. It might be kind of hard for them to remember at the end of the year what they attended back in September. So next question, please describe any barriers that prevented you from participating in the Title I program or events. So again, for that one, you might list a few options that parents could check. For example, childcare, transportation, the time of the event. But you'd also want to be sure that you just leave them some space to write down any additional barriers that they might be facing. Of the events hosted this year, are there any that you would or would not attend again? Again, maybe giving them a few options to choose from, as well as space to provide their own ideas. Let's see. What events would you like to see during the next school year, helping you plan for the future? Were the majority of your interactions with district and school staff positive or negative? What is your preferred method of communication with the district or school? Let's see. So those couple of questions are just giving us an idea of how parents view their interactions with the school, as well as possible ideas for improvement. So it may be beneficial to break some of these questions down a little bit further, and separate general communication, such as information about upcoming events, basic school info, things like that, versus more individualized communication with parents regarding their individual student. They could have very different experiences with those two types of communication. And of course, how could the district or school improve communication with parents? If your district or school has something like a parent advisory council, be sure to include that information on the survey as well and ask parents if they'd like to join. If you don't currently have a group like that, maybe you include a question to sort of gauge general interest. Is anyone interested in forming an advisory council like that? So it goes without saying on your results that you may get pluses and deltas. You may have some strengths identified as well as some opportunities for growth, and that's absolutely okay. There is definitely not a requirement that all parent feedback be positive. That's not something that we look for during monitoring. The important thing is that you're taking those results and you're using them to improve your program. I mentioned at the beginning of this section, if you aren't using your survey results, then there isn't really much point in conducting the survey. You want to be sure that you consider the other data sources as you are reviewing and analyzing survey results. The survey results alone don't always tell the whole story. Actually, they probably never tell the whole story. So looking at multiple data sources is going to allow you to conduct what we would call a triangulation of that data and identify areas for improvement. One thing that you might consider is the number of more negative or delta responses that you receive to a question. For example, let's say that a small handful of parents check that the compact was not discussed during the parent-teacher conference. It could be that a few people maybe just don't remember that happening at their conference, or it could be that for a couple of conferences, the teacher forgot to include that. Those responses could be outliers. Now, if a large majority of the responses say that the compact discussion didn't occur, then that's something that you want to explore further. So in that instance, the school could check with the teachers. They could review that conference documentation that we mentioned at the beginning of the webinar to see if the data there supports the survey responses. And then next steps can be determined based on that triangulation of data. So that takes care of that main topic. And I know there were questions because I heard the chat dinging quite a bit. So let me take a look.
One of the questions was, can we address where we are with payment for attendees for the conference?
Okay. I did pass the list of everybody who requested to attend on, and I believe we are currently working on the DPR to get that approved, but I'll check and let people know where we are with that. Okay. Oh, and then we had some technical issues, but you fixed it yourself, Dana. Way to go. Okay. All right. And let me check the email really quick, see if there's any questions there. Okay. All right, and then I did have one more announcement that I wanted to save for the end, just in case anyone joined late. We did get some feedback on our webinar feedback survey recently about support and resources for new coordinators. And as a matter of fact, I also see one in my email right now. So I wanted to give a couple of reminders in today's webinar. First up is make sure that if you are a new coordinator, or even if you've been there for a little while, make sure that you have been added as the district's Title I coordinator in Open House. I receive an email whenever a district goes in and adds or removes somebody from that role, and that's how I maintain our email distribution list, our newsletter subscriber list. This helps ensure that you get any Title I related communication that's going to come from KDE. Also, when a new coordinator is added, I notify your assigned Title I consultant, and they will reach out to you with some resources. They'll also offer to set up a one-on-one training session. So be sure that you're contacting your Title I consultant. And if you don't know who that is linked on the slide there. It's also on our webpage. And you can always contact your assigned consultant with any questions. We're happy to set up a time to provide you with technical assistance you need. If you want to walk through something on a Teams call or just, have a quick question, that's fine. And remember, you don't have to be new to get support from your consultant. Also, be sure to check out all of our resources on our documents and resources webpage. We have a ton of resources over there. It may seem overwhelming if you are just starting out. So for newer coordinators, I've listed on the slide what I would kind of start with. I definitely start with the Title I handbook and the new coordinator webinar. I think that's about an hour long. It's a very high level overview of Title I. And then the handbook is going to go into more specific detail about program requirements. And you can use the table of contents to quickly jump to a different section of the handbook. Up next, I have our newsletters and webinars. We do keep those posted on our webpage for a year. I would recommend starting with the most recent one and then kind of working your way backwards. I'd also like to point out that on each newsletter, there's something called In This Issue. It's up kind of in the top right-hand corner of the newsletter. And that just very briefly lists the contents of each newsletter. So you don't have to fully read through every single thing to find what you were looking for. And then for the webinars, what you might want to do is pull up the accompanying PowerPoint for each webinar, which is also posted on the webpage, and refer quickly to the agenda and then see if there's something in that particular webinar that you needed information about. Many of the webinars and newsletters also make reference to the other resources available on that web page. So thank you to the person who provided that feedback on our survey to let us know that we needed to put this information out there. Okay, upcoming webinar date. Our last webinar of the year is going to be on Thursday, December 14th, of course, at 10 a.m. Eastern. So mark your calendars for that. And I will have some dates for next year's webinars when we meet in December. And I know I just talked about that survey, but again, we do value your feedback. We want to know what is helpful to you, what you want to see more of in our webinars and our newsletters. So you can always reach out to me or your consultant, but if you'd prefer to submit something anonymously, you can also do that through our webinar feedback survey, and there's a link to that in our newsletter. Okay, and before we go, we will check the chat. Okay, shout out to our Title I consultants. I absolutely agree. And special shout out to Erica. She's my lifeline too, honestly. All right, and then let me check the email. I don't see any more questions, so if you think of anything after the fact, be sure to reach out and we will get back to you. Thank you for joining us today. Oh, and sorry, before you go, David's just put in the chat. We want to remind you that we are working on a documentation storage solution with PCG, Public Consulting Group. Briefly mentioned that last webinar. It's called Title I Next. We are going to have more information coming about that, so be on the lookout for that in the coming weeks and months. We're really excited to be able to provide this opportunity for those of you who are interested. All right, thanks everybody. Have a great day.